Okay, so we are going to be going through leaves for now, once the PowerPoint decides to calm down. There'll be a small review of cells in here as well, just the different types of cells that are in plants. And as you'll notice, I'm using a modified version of this PowerPoint from a book called Botany Basics. Just a few of the slides I did steal from this particular PowerPoint, and then I added a bunch at the end. So leaf function. The main function of leaves is to absorb sunlight and use this energy to produce sugars. And that is photosynthesis, which you would have learned about in biology, and we'll be touching on it again here in botany. Photosynthesis is the creation of sugar from carbon dioxide and water using the energy of the sun. Leaves are usually flat, so they can absorb the maximum amount of light as efficiently as possible. The anatomy of a leaf. You can see this picture here at the bottom. A leaf is connected to the stem by a structure called the petiole. So it kind of looks like a little leaf stem, if you want to call it that. The base of the stem where the petiole connects is called the node. Where the petiole connects to the leaf, it's called the axil. And the axil is where we happen to find the buds, clusters, and new emerging leaves. Here's a cross-section of a leaf. A leaf blade consists of several layers. The outer layer, the top and bottom, is going to be the epidermis, and the main function is just for the protection of the leaf. So you have an upper epidermis and a lower epidermis, and if you were to grab a leaf, that is what you're touching on both sides. So the epidermis is the layer that can be specialized. For example, some leaves have little hairs for protection. The cuticle is the part of the epidermis that produces the cutin, and cutin is a waxy layer that protects the plant from dehydration and disease. Increasing light intensity will increase the thickness of the cutin layer, hence the need for hardening off before moving plants. Cutin also repels water, and this can make some pesticides less effective unless they have additives that help them to penetrate or even stick to that cutin layer. If they don't have any type of additive in them, that cutin is going to act just like water and basically run right off of the leaf. Guard cells are specialized epidermal cells, and they're like little valves to the leaves. Let me hide this real quick. They can open and close the leaf, or open and close in response to weather, light, and moisture, and that just shuts the leaf off so that it is fully protected. They regulate the passage of water, oxygen, and carbon dioxide, so they're used for gas exchange, kind of similar to what your stomata do, except the guard cells are also allowing water in and out. The openings in the guard cells are called the stomata, and most stomata are found on the underside of leaves. And that is because if water is going to be coming out of these guard cells, you want to have the least amount of water leaving as possible, so you want it to not be facing the sun. Conditions that would cause a plant to lose water are high temp and low humidity. And most of the time your guard cells are at this point going to close, which would seal off the stomata, and they're also going to close in the absence of light. Now, if you recall from biology, there are different types of plants depending on where they live. They change how their stomata work. Some plants, at least the ones around here, are going to have them open during the day and then they'll close off at night. Plants that might live in a desert would have their stomata on the opposite schedule, where they are opening them at night and closing them off during the day. And that is strictly just to keep more water inside of the plant than is leaving. The mesophyll layer is found in the middle of the leaf, and it has two layers. The dense upper layer is called the palisade layer, and then the air-filled soft lower layer is called the spongy mesophyll, and you can see them both labeled in that diagram. It's important because this is where photosynthesis is going to take place. So just for a review, we have an outer layer, which is the epidermis. It has the cuticle, the guard cells, and the stomata. The inner layer is the mesophyll, consisting of the palisade layer, spongy mesophyll, and your epidermis is for protection. Mesophyll is for production. So here's a close-up, and it has some of those terms that we talked about. It would have been a couple weeks ago, I believe, at this point. So your cuticle is on the outside. Your upper epidermis is on both parts, your lower epidermis. Palisade layer, which is some mesophyll cells. This is where we're going to be having our chloroplasts. And then inside there, here's a vein, which we'll be talking about the different types of veins. And the xylem and the phloem would be inside of these veins, that little network. The stomata guard cells are going to be down here at the bottom. So the guard cell is the cell itself. The stomata is what we call just the opening of it. And then you have the cuticle is obviously on both sides as well. Types of modified leaves. We have scale leaves. These are found in rhizomes and buds, which enclose and protect. Seed leaves, cotyledons. We talked a little bit about these with seeds. They are found in embryonic plants. They store food for the developing seedling. Spines and tendrils, such as those found on barberry and pea plants, protect the plant or they help to support the stem. Storage leaves, such as those on bulbous plants and succulents, that's just for food storage. And bracts are often brightly colored. For example, the showy structures on dogwoods and poinsettias are bracts, not petals. So let's look at the beginning here. Leaves are the organ of a plant. All leaves originate as primidoria in the bud. In the early spring, a leaf primidorium consists of less than 200 cells. It's pretty small. In response to changes in temperature, daylight, and availability of water, hormones are produced that stimulate these cells to divide. Within a few days or weeks, the original 200 have multiplied and differentiated and expanded into a structure consisting of millions of cells. So it's all based on the nutrients and the conditions that are currently happening. Juvenile leaves are going to be the first leaves produced. Gibberellins are a class of hormones, and at maturity, most leaves will have a stalk and a flattened blade, which has a network of veins or vascular bundles. Stipules are a pair of leaf-like, scale-like, or thorn-like appendages, sometimes present at the base of the petiole. And the sessile, these are leaves lacking stipules. So here we have just a simple leaf. You can see the single blade. And then we have a compound leaf, which is consisting of leaflets. Pinetly compound leaves. They have leaflets in pairs along an extension of the petiole. So here's the petiole and the leaves come out. They are all extensions of it. A lot of ferns you'll see are like this. This particular one is a little bit different. They have all the leaflets attached at the same point at the end of the petiole. So instead of branching out like this one does, they're all connected at the very end point here. The function of the leaf we know is photosynthesis, process of plants trapping light energy from the sun, storing the energy in carbohydrates that can be used by the plants. For respiration, it's an exchange of gases. Oxygen goes out, carbon dioxide goes in through the stomata. And transpiration, which is the process of water evaporating into the atmosphere in vapor form when it reaches the leaves. Root pressure is going to force liquid out of the hydrocathoids, which is a special opening at the tip of the leaf veins, and this loss of water is called glutination. So as far as leaf attachment goes, there's a few different ways leaves can be attached to a plant, which you probably weren't really expecting. There's an alternate, which means that they are arranged alternately. Leaves are attached to the twig, and they may alternate or spiral around the stem. You can have opposites, which means that they are basically attached in pairs. And whorled leaves, these are leaves in groups of 3 or more. So this is what that would look like. If it's alternating, you have a leaf here. You're not going to have one directly on the other side, but a little farther up, it'll poke out on the other side of the stem. A little farther up, goes back to the right. A little farther up, back to the left. It's not directly across, like it is in an opposite plant where they are in pairs. Whorled leaves go all the way around the stem, so they are more closely related to an opposite leaf, but add a few more to it. and then it goes up the stalk, and you'll have another whorl that goes all in the same diameter straight around. There are 275,000 different leaf-producing plants. That is a lot of plants and a lot of plant leaves to try to classify, and I'm sure that there are some in different remote locations that we've never seen before. Many can be distinguished from each other by their shape, size, and texture, so they're all a little bit different. In many plants, different forms of the leaves may be formed in addition to the typical photosynthetic leaves. Leaves can assume any form with variations in size, shape, texture, color, odor, taste, etc. Veins. Similar to how leaves are, there are different ways that veins can form. We have pinnately veined leaves. This is one primary leaf called the midvein, which is included within an enlarged midrib. So there's a central vein, and then you're going to have little veins coming off of that main vein. Secondary veins are going to branch from that midvein. And palmately veined leaves, which there's several primary veins fan out from the base of the blade. Primary veins are more or less parallel to one another in monocots. Primary veins diverge from each other in various ways in the dicots. This branching arrangement is referred to as netted or reticulate veination. In a few leaves, no midvein or large vein is present. Instead, the veins fork evenly and progressively from the base of the blade to the opposite margins, and this is called a dichotomous veination, like a ginkgo tree. So here are some leaf types. This is an American elm and a pinnet. There's the big midvein, and then you can see these secondary veins are shooting off of that midvein. And in the palmet, like a Japanese maple, the main point is right here, and then they all kind of spread out from there. This is a ginkgo, and you can see all of the parallel veins shooting out of that one. Veins consist of xylem and phloem tissues surrounded by a jacket of thicker parenchyma cells called the bundle sheath. Various sizes, and they're scattered throughout the mesophyll, and it gives the leaf a skeleton-type look. Monocots have their own type of vein pattern. Most of the time they're going to be parallel veins, and they're usually not differentiated into palisaded spongy layers. Some leaves, like grasses, have large, thin-walled, bulliform cells on either side of the midrib toward the upper surface, and in dry conditions, these cells are going to partly collapse, causing the leaf to fold or roll to reduce transpiration. So it's trying to protect itself from losing all of its water. A shade leaf. These are leaves in the shade. They tend to be larger because they need to receive more sunlight, and they're getting less sunlight in total, so they have to be bigger so they can capture any available light that's out there. Due to less sunlight and heat, they are going to be thinner. They have fewer well-defined mesophyll layers, chloroplasts, and hairs. Leaves in arid regions. Due to the limited water, wide temperature ranges, and high light intensities, these plants have developed adaptations for survival. They are thick, leathery leaves with fewer stomata, or the stomata have sunken below the surface in specialized depressions to reduce transpiration. Many have succulent water-retaining leaves. There's no leaves at all. Stems may take over the function of photosynthesis, or they may have dense, hairy coverings. Pine trees, or those whose water may be restricted in the winter, they have some leaf modifications similar to those of desert plants. This includes a sunken stomata with a thick cuticle. That thicker cuticle is supposed to keep water in. And they have a layer of thick-walled cells called the hypodermis right beneath the epidermis. The leaves of compass plants face east and west with the blades perpendicular to the ground so that when the sun is overhead, it strikes only the thin edge of the leaf, minimizing moisture loss. So here are some examples of plants that would be in arid regions along with a pine tree, which you can see in the upper right-hand corner. Leaves of aquatic areas. These are submerged leaves of water plants. They usually have less xylem and phloem and mesophyll, which are not differentiated into palisade and spongy, and they have larger air spaces. So if you're living in a watery area, you're really not going to need to worry too much about having great veins because there's water easily accessible to the entire leaf. A tendril is a modified leaf, and when curled tightly around more rigid objects, it's going to help the plant to climb or be supported with weak, tiny little stems. A lot of bean plants have these tendrils. If you touch a tendril, there is a sudden rapid growth of cells on the opposite side, and it's going to make that tendril start to curl in the direction of the contact. I actually did this whenever I lived in my apartment. I had a tiny little garden out on my little balcony, and I would touch the tendrils to help my bean plants support themselves as they were growing. If the contact is brief, the tendril will reverse in the movement and it's going to straighten out again. If the tendril encounters a solid, continuous, sustainable support, it's actually going to coil tightly around it and it'll use that to grow. Leaves of many cacti and other desert plants are modified as spines, which reduce water loss and they protect the plant as well. Photosynthesis is going to occur in the stem instead of in the leaf or in the spine. Most spines are modification of the whole leaf in which most of the normal tissue is replaced by sclerenchyma cells. In some woody plants, the stipules at the base of the leaves are modified as short paired spines, and many spine-like objects in the axils of the leaves of woody trees and plants are modified stems, not modified leaves, and this should be referred to as a thorn. The prickles of roses and raspberries are neither leaves nor stems, but outgrowths from the epidermis or cortex, which is kind of interesting because you always think of a rose as having these big, huge thorns, and it's not a thorn at all. It's just a grouping of cells. So now we have storage leaves, and if you've ever seen a succulent plant, they have big storage leaves. They're basically leaves modified for water retention. They're large, thin-walled parenchyma cells without chloroplasts to the interior of the sclerenchyma tissue just beneath the epidermis. They contain large vacuoles for water storage, and if removed from the plant and set aside, they will actually hold water for several months. So if you are ever stuck out in a deserty area and you see a succulent plant, you could actually use its leaves to get some water out of it. Same as with a cactus. You can actually drink water out of a cactus. You just got to watch for the thorns or the spines. Fleshy leaves like onions and lilies and other bulbs store large amounts of carbohydrates. So that's where you're going to get your food from. Not that you would want to eat a lily leaf, because I do believe that some of those are toxic. Carbs are used by the plant during rapid growth in the growing season. Flower pot leaves. Some leaves of epiphytes grow usually non-parasitically on other plants. Yes, they will actually grow on another plant. The leaves develop into urn-like pouches that become home of ant colonies. And the ants are going to carry in soil, which is going to add some nitrogenous waste. And then moisture is going to collect in that soil, which is going to allow for these leaves to start to grow. Just like what we have going on here. So we have one plant that is growing wonderfully, and it has a huge flower pot leaf, and then an ant carried in some soil, and now we're getting another little plant growing inside of that leaf. Window leaves. There are 3 plants of the carpetweed family found in the Kalahari Desert that have unique adaptations to living in dry, sandy climates. They're shaped like ice cream cones, and they're about 1.5 inches long, buried in the sand. Only a dime-sized wide end of the leaf is exposed to the surface. They're covered with relatively transparent, thick epidermis with few stomata and a waxy cuticle. A mass of tightly packed transparent water storage cells below the absorbed end allow light coming through to penetrate the chloroplasts, which are like these little windows. It's going to keep the plant away from the winds, and it's going to allow them to thrive in the desert conditions. This is a succulent. It has large bulbous leaves, and this is where the water is going to be. Reproductive leaves. Some leaves of the walking fern produce new plants at their tips. The succulent leaves of air plants have little notches along the leaf margins in which tiny plantlets are produced, and complete with roots and leaves even after a leaf has been removed from a parent plant. Each of the plantlets can develop into a mature plant. So these are little plantlets. You can actually take them off of that leaf. If you put them into soil, they will grow themselves. Floral leaves. You probably never knew there was so many different types of leaves. These are specialized leaves known as bracts, and they are found at the base of the flowers or flower stalks. They are often mistaken as flower petals. The flowers of a poinsettia have no petals, but the brightly colored floral bracts that surround the small flowers function as petals in attracting pollinators. In dogwood trees, the tiny flowers in their button-like clusters have inconspicuous petals, but the white-pink bracts surround them. Clary's annual sage has large, colorful bracts produced at the top of the flowering stalks, well above the flowers. So here's just some examples. And these are the most interesting ones here. These are the insect trapping leaves. These are the carnivorous plants. There's almost 200 species of flowering plants that have insect trapping leaves. Insectivorous plants grow mostly in swampy areas and bogs. Soil may be nitrogen deficient or it may not really be available for use. So since they can't get food from the soil, they have to get it somewhere else. Now they can photosynthesize, but sometimes eating is a little bit easier. They are going to actually take insects and they will digest them. And most of these plants, like I said, they can photosynthesize, so they can survive without any insects if they have the proper nutrients, but a lot of them do need to eat as well. These are the different types of insect trapping leaves, and I'll show you some videos of these ones in a second. So you have pitcher plants, sundews, Venus flytraps, and bladderworts. All right, so let's take a look at a couple of these videos here, and you guys could watch these on your own as well. If you just Googled carnivorous plants, there are many, many videos that will pop up.
We just had the most amazing family vacation. Oh my God.
If you were already kind of creeped out by carnivorous plants like this pitcher plant, a new study detailing how exactly they trap their prey probably won't help. That's because the study, which looked at the Nepenthes rafflesiana species, found that the plant is pretty crafty when it comes to trapping ants, its largest food source. The plant takes advantage of the fact that ants are social animals. Instead of trapping every ant that comes by, it lets the scout ants escape and waits until the whole group shows up to spring the trap. It does that by leaving part of its pitcher dry for the scout ant before wetting the pitcher when more ants show up, leading it to capture batches of ants instead of individuals. The lead author on the study, Bristol University's Dr. Ulrika Bauer, has examined this kind of behavior in other pitcher plants, previously noting how plants adjust the slipperiness of their pitchers to trap. Deactivating its trap from time to time to prevent capturing scout ants doesn't seem to make sense from an evolutionary perspective, because presumably the plant would want...
Please come and move your feet.
Sorry about that, guys. I'm going to rewind it just a little bit. It's in the middle of winter right now, and they are trying to plow things, and people have their cars lined up in the parking lot.
Pitcher plants, previously noting how plants adjust the slipperiness of their pitchers to trap more ants. As the study notes, the plant deactivating its trap from time to time to prevent capturing scout ants doesn't seem to make sense from an evolutionary perspective, because presumably the plant would want to trap all the ants it could. But by catching ants in batches through turning the trap on and off, ultimately the plant trapped more ants than always having the trap on, which means plants that had the on and off feature would have survived and reproduced more successfully. The study makes a point of clarifying that it's a more viable strategy for larger plants than for smaller plants, because larger plants have more pitchers and therefore a higher chance of catching batches of ants. The researchers also wrote the behavior helps explain why the ability to create a more slippery pitcher surface is present across species of Nepenthes. Producing
All those cars around that curve, please move at this time.
Only pay for what you need with Liberty Mutual.
Okay, so there was one. Let's take a look here at a bladderwort.
Unable to survive on the scanty rations of the world's greediest environments, some plants developed a swift and deadly draw to reap refreshment from the flesh of their rivals. Plant brutality. On a barren wasteland where nutrients have been swept away by winds and water, like so many tumbleweeds, a plant like Ghost Town somehow clings to life. Here, the hardiest settlers are those willing to confront and consume the hardiest adversary. A silent desperado stands shadowed in a dark corner, ominously toying with his weapon, a simple bladder with a hair trigger. This bladderwort prepares to strike, cocking his bladder by unloading it, creating negative pressure inside. A crustacean obliviously saunters past, but makes a fatal misstep and brushes the hair trigger. Ow! The suction is released. With an acceleration force over 2,000 Gs, there is no escape from his deadly draw, and this hapless drifter is pushing daisies in milliseconds. In nearly every ecosystem around the globe, you'll find some fly-speck nutrient-poor locale, and it's a safe bet that this ruthless quick draw can be found there, slinging bladders and rustling copepods. How did plants with such complex weaponry develop? And how did they reach almost every habitable continent on Earth? Is the bladder even a weapon? Or is this quick draw just the rummy at the watering hole, sipping spirits too swiftly to sort the water from the worm? Plant brutality is the product of court-ordered art therapy for the Forest Ecohydrology Research Lab. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.
Alright guys, that's where I'm going to stop everything for today as far as our notes go, and I will meet you back here again tomorrow.